Hello, everyone, and welcome to my channel. My name is Shay. If this is your first time here, welcome to Wallet and Style. This channel is all about having clarity with the numbers, reaching your financial goals, and buying the things that you love. And around here, we like to talk about luxury goods. So, this is officially the first video of on how to start a vintage luxury handbag collection. Now, this is also including accessories, but I want to put this together because for any of you who is either starting to collect vintage or are thinking about it, or just as a reference for the future if you start really looking into vintage goods. So, my goal is to give you as much information as possible. I will share my personal process when it comes to vintage and, just have fun with it because I absolutely love it. Now, before we get started, I want to apologize as I sound a little off. I just, had a horrible summer cold. So sorry if I sound a little nasal, but hopefully you can hear me clearly. All right, enough of that. Let's go ahead and get started and first talk about what is a vintage, right? So, vintage is pretty much anything that's about 20 years old. And when it comes to handbags or accessories, we're pretty much looking into, what the fashion world was back then. And for me, I love all of that stuff. I mean, the fact that I am collecting a piece of fashion history is just, it makes me so happy because I don't look at my handbags just as, oh, I just collect handbags. No, this is a portfolio of mine that I have been building now for over 10 years. And so I really take pride and joy. And when it comes to vintage, it's just, I don't know, it's exciting. It's sort of like a challenge because these bags or accessories are no longer available, right, from these brands. So as you start looking into vintage, you start to realize that a lot of these bags were designed in the late 80s, in the 90s, or the early 2000s. From my collection, I have bags that are at this point 35 years old. And for me, that is like, wow, I really enjoy that because as I get older and I grow with these bags, well into my 50s and 60s, these bags are going to be over 40, 50 years old. So I love all of that about vintage. All right, now the other thing that I want to share is why vintage. And I think it's because when we look at a vintage bag, some might say that it's retaining its value, which is true because some of these bags, because they're no longer designed by the fashion house, over time it can retain its value. For example, Chanel. I have quite a few vintage handbags from Chanel, and that is because, as we know, the history of Chanel over time, it just increases in value. So for me, I really was drawn to that just because of the fact that I know that towards the when the pandemic was happening, I kind of started to see a lot of videos out there where people were complaining about some of the quality of the handbags that they were producing, and I think that there was such a how can I explain it? There was such a demand, right, for like the Louis and the Chanels during the pandemic that they were just mass producing these silhouettes. And so vintage is a little bit different because back then we didn't have social media. And so these, handbags were really well designed and really the person who made the bag just really took their time with the details. So that's why I always say that vintage is just so unique and so amazing with that because of the value that you get, not just from the bag, but just the history overall. Another thing is that you can't find any of these pieces anymore at the store. Now, I do have to say that now in 2026, you do see a lot of pop-up like vintage boutiques, which are really, really fun. But that is the beauty of vintage. And for me, it's sort of like a hunt. I am looking for a specific bag or a specific brand or specific style. And we have tons of options now. So although some of these fashion houses can probably do like a refresher on a silhouette, it's just not the same. So that's why I say that, unique pieces are probably one of the biggest things that I love to have in my collection. All right, another thing is the price point, because referencing back to what I just mentioned during the pandemic, a lot of these fashion houses, the prices increased quite a bit. And so for vintage handbags, you can still find something of very good quality, a unique piece from a great brand like Chanel, Gucci, or Louis, and you can buy something for probably under $2,500 still in 2026, compared to a brand new like Chanel bag, which I believe the classic flap is going for brand new with taxes over $10,000, which is absolutely crazy to think about. But that is the difference with the vintage. And then the other thing is, buying pre-love, because essentially that's what we're doing. And I do have a couple of videos on my channel now where I talk about how you will save thousands of dollars pre-love. So I'll make sure to insert it around here so you can check that out. But also know that when you're buying vintage, it's intentional. And I think that's what I want to do with my channel going forward. I want to see all of you be able to buy the things that you want, not just the handbags, but go on the trips that you want, get things for yourself and your family, and just enjoy your money, right? But do it intentional. And that's why vintage is also living intentional, because you're looking for that, right? You're looking for that specific piece that you want. And for me, I absolutely love the thrill. All right, so I'm going to share with you 4 steps that I personally, go through every time I look into a vintage piece, and pretty much kind of how I started when I started collecting vintage handbags, which was about 2, 3 years ago. All right, so the first step is to know what you want before you shop. So it's very easy for us to go on social media and just scroll and scroll and scroll. Now, I think that the best way is for you to just make a simple list of what you're looking for. You want to also know your budget. As mentioned earlier, you can buy, a vintage handbag for under $2,600. But let's say you have a budget of $3,500, which I think is a very healthy budget for vintage goods, and you can buy yourself maybe a nice bag, or even, an accessory piece like a wallet, or maybe sunglasses, or even jewelry. When it comes to vintage, it doesn't just have to be handbags, but it could just be the fact that you love Chanel, as an example. So you want to get the Chanel bag, and you want to get like vintage Chanel jewelry, which I have seen some of these pieces, and they're absolutely stunning. So that's just to give you an idea. But knowing your budget is something that is very important. And then the other thing is to research the brand and the style, and what is it that is attracting you to that particular era, right? So, for example, I have a piece that is from the early 2000s, and when I found it, I really jumped on it because I couldn't afford that particular bag at that time. And so I was drawn to it because I knew that it was a theme that was at that time, and it was all about like the music and the fashion, and just the whole 2000 era was just the, what was it, the Y2K. It was just absolutely um thrilling for me. So I I always kept that in my mind. So always know what kind of brand you want, and the style. It's really, really important. All right, and then the other thing is to avoid the impulse buying. And I have briefly talked about this. I'm sorry. Um, that when it comes to vintage, you really want to be intentional, right? You don't want to just start shopping all these vintage bags and not really know what you're getting yourself into, because the reality is vintage, and this is hard for me, we need patience. Okay, patience. Sometimes we might see an item that we're like, oh my God, I have to get it. But honestly, sometimes, with a month or two, you might come up with another silhouette very similar. So have patience. I know it's hard. It is hard for me, but that is also something to keep in mind. Okay, so step number 2 is where to shop. Now, I personally like to use eBay. So some of my, well, not some, probably like 90% of my vintage goods came from eBay. Now, the only reason, not the only, there's a couple, but the reason why I prefer eBay is because of the buyer protection that you get and also the money back guarantee. And I have had a situation with them, which I'll talk about in a different video. But I like that, especially when it comes to these vintage goods. You want to make sure that you are protected as a buyer. What I also like about eBay is the authenticity guarantee that you get for these luxury handbags. They do a very good job by making sure that once you buy it from the buyer, it goes through their facility and they're going to inspect the bag. They're going to make sure that it is real, that the date code is on there, if it has an authenticity card, making sure that everything looks good before they ship it back to you. So I like that because it's a peace of mind for me and I don't have to worry about it. And when you get that from eBay, you're going to get a card from them saying that it's been inspected, this is real, and you're good to go. And if you plan on selling any of these bags in the future, it's always good to have all this information. Another thing that I like about eBay is that once you start shopping on eBay, you can filter on the left hand side, the brand that you want and also the location. So I prefer anything that is more in the US based just because of the shipping and the import costs if you were to buy international. Although I have bought international, but I like that as well. So you're saving yourself time and you're saving yourself, what I like to say, headaches, because sometimes when you buy from international resellers, it can get a little tricky. And I will talk about that in a different video. But other platforms that you can look into are like the Fashion File, the Real Real, and directly from Japanese resellers, which Japanese resellers, from my understanding, it is illegal for them to sell fakes. So you're pretty much on the good side when it comes to buying from a Japan reseller. It's it's real. So just keep that in mind. But I personally overall prefer eBay just because of the extra protection. And I had mentioned this too in one of my other videos that if it's I believe if the price point is under $500 and they're saying that it's a Chanel, for example, or Louis, they sometimes will have on there for you to pay an extra $40 to make sure that it goes through the eBay facility to confirm that it is authentic. So I personally like that for $40. I think it's absolutely worth it. So just keep that in mind if you are considering buying vintage on eBay. Okay, step number 3 is how I research before I buy. So I always say look at the seller's feedback. Again, if you go on eBay, you're going to see that it says 98% positive ratings or 99%. So kind of go through it, right? It's like a review of the seller. You want to make sure that people are saying that it's real, that they communicate that everything came as what they said it was or whatever it was, right? You want to always make sure you do your research. You also want to be very careful with the pictures. If you see a bag that sparks your interest, but yet you don't see or feel like something's off, don't be afraid to just message the seller and say, I'm interested in this beautiful bag. Can you please share more of, upfront pictures of, say, like the stitching, the code, or the color? Because sometimes when you take pictures, the lighting kind of reflects a different color. So if your gut feels like, you know what, something's off, side note, this has nothing to do with luxury, you're probably right. So go with your gut feeling and just request more information. They should have no problem at all, if it's real, to provide that for you. Okay, and another thing is to compare. So let's say that you saw a bag that it's just popular at the moment, like a vintage piece, for example. You want to research, okay, I have this information from eBay, now I'm going to look at another website. Kind of compare. You want to make sure that you are paying a fair price. trust me, you'd be surprised. In today's world, people will just increase the price on something and you realize that you probably could have bought it somewhere else much, not, I don't want to say cheaper because it's not cheaper, but you want to make sure that it's a fair price. So know the market value for that particular bag. And then the other thing, as mentioned before, is to never rush, right? Because good deals will come around. And speaking from experience, and I will talk about this more in other videos, trust me, I have probably paid more than what I want to admit just because I was in a rush. So please don't rush this, okay? Don't rush it. Trust me, another deal will come through. All right, and step number 4, and that is making the purchase with confidence. So I say, once you have done all of these stats, you've done the research, you know what the market value is, you are, confident about the brand that you want, the style that you want, the era, whatever that is, that's when you're ready to buy. You have pretty much everything set up for you, whether you start making that list from the beginning. You want to make sure that you're confident. Now, I'm going to pause here for a second because I am putting together a really cool, like a handbag planner where I'm going to have for you, it's all going to be digital, where you can print all this stuff out and really have a solid plan when it comes to buying handbags. Now, this has nothing to do with vintage. You can do that with the handbags you have now or whatever you have in your collection. But I'm putting this together because I struggled with this when I started, my collection 10 years ago. I'm just buying stuff and I had to like write sticky notes of like, okay, this costs here, that costs how much, and I bought it there. So it's like I'm going to have all this put together. So I just wanted to mention that quickly. More information on that very, very soon. It's almost ready. But this is going to help you when you're ready to make any purchase, not just vintage, but you want to make sure that you're ready to buy. You have everything on your list and you are ready to go. Okay, and the other thing is to learn how to sort of like negotiate. You want to make sure that you have the best offer for the seller. You have done your research, you notice that maybe it had a particular scratch or maybe it has to get fixed. Have all of that information ready so then you can make them an offer that one is not going to insult them because vintage collectors like myself, and these people either are selling it for others or maybe they're just getting rid of it. You want to make sure that you have all the information to back up as to why you're offering them that price. So say for example, it's $500 less than what they're asking for. You have the facts. It has a scratch, it's missing this or it's missing that, whatever it is. Just make sure that you are ready to negotiate and have, a plan in place. All right, and then the other thing is and when the bag arrives, you have to inspect it. Now, because I've mentioned eBay, do your own inspection when you get the bag at home. You want to make sure that it looks like the picture. You want to make sure that the information is there, all of it, right? The card that came from either the seller, whether that was like, for example, a Chanel bag or from eBay. You want to make sure you have everything. And then the last thing is understand how to handle a return if something doesn't look right or you need to return it. Again, from my personal experience, I went through this probably earlier in 2026, and I will talk about that in another video. But you want to make sure that you're fully prepared. If your mindset is now like, okay, Jay, I want to start collecting vintage handbags, or I want to know more about it, this is a process. So I want to break this down as much as possible because I want you to be ready. Okay. So I want you to have everything that you need. But if you were to get that bag and you need to return it, you want to make sure you have everything because you're going to have to go back to either the seller or eBay or a different, seller explaining why you're returning it. And before you make that purchase, if it's not like eBay, for example, let's just say an international seller, like a Japanese seller, you want to make sure their return policy. going to
All
do
right.
a quick recap of the steps. So, step number one is to know what you want before you shop. Step number two is know where to shop. And as mentioned, I prefer eBay. Step number three, how you do your research. Make sure you have everything ready before you start buying. And step number four, you want to make sure that you are confident with your purchase going forward. So those are the steps. And I can't wait. I can't wait to finish this whole series because I love all this stuff. And as mentioned, I'm going to have this digital handbag planner very soon. I'm just finishing up putting all the final touches to it, but it's going to be awesome. And it's something that is going to help you start your collection, or even if you have one right now, it's going to be an easy process and very user friendly. All right, so thank you so much for watching. Let me know what vintage handbags you are looking at. If you are a vintage collector or you kind of have more questions, I would be more than happy to answer that for you. You can always connect with me via email and on my social to check out the blog for all that information. So make sure to open the description box down below. So come hang out, subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching. I value your time. Have an amazing day, and I will see you on my next video. Take care.